Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to podcast on the Sicha. Today we are farbringing and podcasting on Likutei Sichos, Chelek Chafhei, and the Sicha, very apropos, is Vayeishev Yutes Kislev. And just as a basic question, Vayeishev, we talk about the uh, the beginning of the sad story, going down to Egypt, becoming slaves. It's not a very, I mean, it's a good ending, we all know, but quite a difficult time in Jewish history. And Yutes Kislev, as we're getting ready to celebrate, is quite the opposite: redemption, celebration. So how do these things go together? How do they work together? How do you bring the emotions, the lifestyles? What's happening here? So just to get us set up, I'd like to hand it over to my dear friend, Rabbi Moshe Grari, to set up the parsha, the Yutes Kislev, and really get us going here.
Okay. First of all, to all of our listeners and viewers, to all of the learners of Project Likutei Sichos, I wish you all a Lashana Toiva, Belimud Achsidis, B'darki Achsidis, Tikaseva V'seichasemu. It should be a year filled with learning the Rebbe's Torah, Likutei Sichos, and it should be a good year. So Shmuel, you asked a good question. How do you reconcile the story of Yosef going down into Mitzrayim, which begins the Galus Mitzrayim, with Yutes Kislev, which is the redemption of the Alter Rebbe and the beginning of a new era? And I just wanted to point out that in the beginning of the Sicha, the Rebbe compares Yutes Kislev, as does the Alter Rebbe and the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rabbeim in between, to a Moyed, to a Yontif like Pesach. It's just in case a person needs to be reminded of that as we head towards Yutes Kislev. So we have this awareness that we're going into a Yontif, a Moyed, and the first approach that we could take is that even though it was a Yerida, it was going down into Galus, but it was a Yerida Tzorech Aliyah. It was for the purpose of all the wonderful things that happen afterwards. Yosef becomes powerful. Yosef helps his family. So you could say Yerida Tzorech Aliyah, and the Rebbe does not like that answer. The Rebbe says that we need to have Geula in Vayeishev. It's not enough to have descent for the purpose of ascent. And ultimately, the purpose of the Sicha, or the going of the Sicha, is to uncover where do we see in Vayeishev, in Galus, in the descent of Yosef into Mitzrayim, where do we see Geula? I think before we even discuss it, I think there's already a layout, a direction that we're taking, that in order to appreciate Yutes Kislev, you have to be able to see Geula within Galus. Within the Yerida, there has to be a Galus. There has to be a Geula. And the Rebbe brings in the Medrash that actually translates the word hurad, which means brought down to Mitzrayim, as kavshain or roida, that it was Yosef was controlling or ruling Mitzrayim. There's another Medrash that says that Yosef took the Shechina with him. Already here, before the Rebbe even explains it, you see where the Rebbe is headed. That in the very descent of Yosef into Mitzrayim, you already have Yosef owning Mitzrayim, and you have Yosef not disconnecting himself from the Shechina. The Eibishter Elokus, godliness, comes with him, even in the very moment of the Hurad, of the Yerida, of the descent into Mitzrayim. I think this is the sort of the setup. Let's see where we go from here.
Well, I think just everybody knows we're mentioning Yutes Kislev, but I think maybe take a quick second, Moshe. I don't know who our listeners for the out in the general public. Just Vayeishev, everybody knows the story, but maybe give just a general 30-second context of what is Yutes Kislev, just really high level, and anybody who wants to research it on their own is welcome to do so. And then it'll make the contrast a little easier with Alter Rebbe. If you don't mind doing that, I think it'll be helpful for the listeners.
Not at all. Yutes Kislev is the day that after 53 days of the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya, the founder of Chabad Hasidus, was jailed on a pretext of various different pretexts, one of which was treason against the Russian government. plus many other libelous things that the government was informed on by the Menagdim, by the opposers to Hasidus and Hasidus Chabad. It was the day of Yud Tes Kislev, the 19th day of the month of Kislev, that the Alter Rebbe was given his official release from the Russian prison. And the tradition that we have since then is that from that point and on, the dissemination of Chassidus Chabad began on a much deeper and much more earnest level. So it's considered a new era. Additionally, over the course of time, for example, the Rebbe Rashab referred to it as Rosh Hashanah LaChasidus. It's the beginning of the new year, which is why I began the beginning with Hoshana Tova, because not only is it the release of the Alter Rebbe from prison, it is also the beginning of a new era in the teaching and the dissemination of Chassidus, and specifically Chassidus Chabad, which is why it has always been, and continues to be a day of great celebration throughout the Chabad community and the Jewish community the world over.
Shukayach for that. So I guess let's start delving into this. In Hebrew, we say this classic nimna hanimnois, this paradox, which is what the Rebbe wants from us. The Rebbe wants us to find a way to manage or relate to galus in a geuladik way. So just to get started, because galus as a general thing, exile, it has the general connotation, obviously being in exile, and then there's the personal connotation of personal exiles. Personal exiles means personal darknesses, personal trials and tribulations, and redemption is also the macro, the micro, and in general, we talk about both hand in hand, a personal redemption of Mitzrayim, our personal redemption, and then the Gula Asida, the great redemption of the Jewish people as a whole. The Rebbe references in the Sicha three types of engagement in dealing with or going down to or engaging with the darkness, so to speak. And maybe we just as a general introduction to, we're jumping right to the finish line, but there are various different methods. And of course, the Rebbe is pushing us to aim for the stars and to see things in the ultimate clarity. But what are the first two steps? So I'll just get started and feel free to interrupt me. But the first one is really when you're engaging with the darkness, like a war, like you're on the floor grappling with it, you're fighting with it, you're engaged with it intellectually, emotionally, mentally, um, and you're really you're mingling with it, you're dealing with it, and it's really becoming part of your day to day.
It's dragging you
You,
down.
you might win, but you'll end up very bloody.
Yeah, I mean, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that when you wrestle with dirt or with someone muddy or dirty, you may beat him at the end, but you're still gonna stink. It's still an awful battle. So that's one approach, and you could do that, but there's a higher one which we talk about a lot. We talk about it in relevance even to Yutes Kislev a lot, which is the idea of pada b'shalom. Or we talk about Shlomo HaMelech, for example, that there was no wars during his time, and therefore he was the one who to build the Beis Hamikdash and all these things because he was so aloof and powerful and strong, that the there wasn't really place for an opposition. It got pushed away so strong. It's winning on a different kind of level. But then there's the highest level, and the highest level is in simple terms, is where there's an engagement in Gullus. It actually says about David HaMelech that after his battles, he had a certain sense of menucha, and in that way he was compared to Shlomo HaMelech. So in other words, he did battle. There is such a concept where the battle alone or the engagement alone could be seen in a different light. And this is where you start really feeling transformation. The question is, the moment you're going to tell me to get down and dirty and engage, it's much easier not to. How does that become?
For me, this Sicha, what you're talking about specifically, is this Sicha is Yutas Kislev. And Yutas Kislev, we are thinking about the novelty of Chassidus, the expectations of somebody who learns Chassidus, and the expectations of us learning the Sicha, and therefore what our responsibilities are. And it's very much the first idea, the Chassidus, not the first thing, the first thing that I'm taking, just listening to you, is it's so much easier to live a level one, which is to be scared of the war, of the battle, and therefore to do what the Sicha says, what the Shvatim did, and as to avoid it as far as possible, right? Whereas someone wants to bring with us when we were all in yeshiva and said all night, if you're not learning Chassidus, is Ashrei Yoshvei V'Secha. It's beautiful that you're home and stay home, because it's getting out there it's a messy world, and I can understand if you're not learning Chassidus why you would choose that path, because it is a messy world, and why deal with it, and it makes sense. But Chassidus is pushing us to the third level, which is Yosef in the Sicha, and that is the ability, and this is what we have to bring about, and this is the beauty of Yutas Kislev and being a chassid, is somehow being fully engaged in the world, 100% engaged, and yet being 100% attached to Hashem, and somebody who everybody walking down the street, while you are engaged in the way Yosef was engaged, and yet continues to see that everything he does is God. And that is number one in this Sicha, the number one thing we can bring about the difficulty, the mission, the expectation, the responsibility of somebody who studies Chassidus is to not be afraid and to get out there and to not let the contradiction, right, this contradiction get to you in any way.
I had a thought, Yisrael, while you were talking. We know from our previous conversations here on the podcast and not that one of the underlying themes of Likutei Sichos is that Yid is a paradox. There's goof, whether it's neshama, whether it's bringing Lamaila and bringing it down Lamata, Ezri Mim Hashem, Oisei Shmayim V'aretz, which basically means that we draw from the highest levels and we bring it down into the lowest levels. A Yid is a paradox. I believe which means to say is that just because something doesn't make sense, just because how am I supposed to serve Hashem, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to make sense. You're made up of two opposite things. Both are fully functional, and both have to coincide. I think the chiddush of this sicha is that the paradox is actually our greatest strength. In other words, if we were lacking one of those two things, we wouldn't be able to get to where we are able to get to, because we're a paradox. That is our strongest tool to reach the greatest heights.
Let's break this down if we can. This is a fantastic idea, and we have to connect with it personally, because, like Yisrael said, it's a day of Chassidus, and if we're gonna celebrate Yutas Kislev, and we're gonna, so let's just break this down piece by piece. So maybe we each take a piece of this. I think that it would be worthwhile to analyze this, because the Rebbe does on the Yosef level, like what was his story on this level, and then maybe one of you could pick up on the Alter Rebbe's story and how we see this in the Alter Rebbe, and then let's go over to ourselves and to our listeners, and let's try and see if we could at least touch a piece of that. So
yeah, so I'll go with Yosef. I mean, to me, this is when I look at it's all one theme, but just the second practical thing in the Sicha of Chassidus is how the Rebbe answers the question. The original question, I'm just writing what Moshe said in the beginning. The original question is, how is it that this parsha is Yutas Kislev? How is it that this parsha, which seems like Hurad, we're going down to Mitzrayim, is actually redemption, is Geula? And the answer on a simple level is a medrash that Hurad is also from Vayeishev, from conquering, is that while Yosef was going down, he was conquering. Now, Shmuley, and I mean, I speak a lot to you about this. We all know that we don't need Chassidus to teach us that after a fall, something good happens. Like in other words, everybody knows this is a general idea, but in the world, in Torah, it's a well-known thing that when that when a fall means any kind of this spiritual descent, physical descent, anything, at the end of the day, you will get out stronger, will make you bigger, big, better. The idea of Chassidus in this Sicha, that while Yosef, this parsha, while Yosef is Urad, in other words, while you are going through your moment, whatever that moment it is in exactly the same time. It is a kibush. It is a conquering, and everybody sees you as a tafachacher, somebody standing a little above. As they saw Yosef, Hashem Tzliach is darker. They saw that Yosef was successful from the first moment. It's like you're being kidnapped, and yet you're part of the story, of the tragic story, which it is, and yet at that same moment, you are somebody who's totally living above that moment at the same time. That contradiction is exactly the ability in our life, especially in this generation, for example, to be successful in business and have a lot of money, and not let it affect in any way who you are as a yid or as a chassid. In other words, to live with gashmias, to be part of the problem and yet stay above. I'll use an extreme story, even though we're not about extreme stories, but just an extreme story that I heard from my teacher. And my teacher told me, Rabbi Shimon Hirschler, who's a visionist chassid, he recently passed away, and he told us that when he went to Mendel Futafas, when he was sitting Shiva, he went into the house and nobody was there, and he was learning a parak Tanya. Tanya, and he said to him, can't learn Torah while 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 you're sitting Shiva, you're not allowed to. So he said to him, and I already suffered a lot. I don't remember the specifics of the details, but basically, when I have this book, this gives me the v'chayit and live with the emunah, the ability to live totally above. You understand? This sefer gives me the ability to just get through it all, because that's the extreme story. But the real story is every little piece while we're going down, we're not actually going down. We're going down, but we're actually have the ability to conquer these two contradictions. Is story number one for Yosef.
Yeah, I think with regards to Yosef, I mean the imagery I gave in my class this morning was that Yosef is standing handing out watermelon to Egyptians. And a person is standing around and saying, why does it have to be Yosef? Why watermelon? What's he going to gain from it? Like we're looking, is it a PR stunt? And Yosef in that moment is a Merkava Mamish Lelakus. Yosef is doing exactly what the Eibishter wants of him, and he exudes godliness. For me, that the imagery of that, the screen, the picture coming out on the screen, seeing, a man with a wilde beard standing with a bunch of Egyptians around, handing out watermelon, and knowing that in this moment he's a shliach, he's a chassid, he's a yid, he's a tzaddik, that is pashat representing Elikus in this world, is just it's a very, very powerful image that I think can be carried over into every single one of our lives. Not necessarily by the flick of a button, but you did want to talk about the Alter Rebbe also. There is a contrast in the Alter Rebbe, where on the one hand the Alter Rebbe went through the process of jail. He was interrogated like an inmate, and he sat through 53 days of a prison sentence like an inmate. I mean, at least b'chitzonius, at least on the surface. And I referenced this earlier, but we had a sikh about the Frierdiker Rebbe, that the Frierdiker Rebbe suffered in prison. If not for the fact that there was a sikh that he said Rosh Hashanah about Hashgacha Pratis, he wouldn't have survived. Which means that the Alter Rebbe suffered in prison, and we see that Rebbe Rashab used the example of the crushing of an olive. It's not called crushing if it's just a spiritual cloud. He suffered. On the other hand, the Rebbe says that he was the balabas. He was in a space of ownership. He owned the jail, he owned the people, and because of that, he was able to change their minds so that Elam Haza itself should recognize that the Alter Rebbe is an Isha Liki, and that Chassidus has to be in this parsim. So this is it's a little bit of a different choice of imagery, when it's not like he's doing something in the world. He himself is suffering. He is suffering, but he's doing so, A, it's by choice, and B, not just it's by choice, but it's also because it's by choice, he forever, as a Rebbe, he forever remains in ownership of the world and of the people that are torturing him.
So I think that this brings us to reflecting on Yosef and reflecting on the story of the Alter Rebbe, and obviously the way the Rebbe is explaining that Yosef's descent is really an ascent. There's Geula in the Galos. I think just to bring it home, the question for us is, and the question for you, the listeners, is: Are you a chassid? Are you a chassid? Siutis Kislev. You're sitting by a Farbrengen. I was sitting by Farbrengen with a bunch of Bachrim recently. It was a class, and I said, "Is anybody here a chassidush Bacher? Raise your hand." And nobody raised their hand. So I said, "We're in trouble."
Mhm.
Obviously, they're not raising. I said, it's time. It's time for us to answer the question. If we're not going to be chassidim, and if we can't call ourselves chassidim for whatever reason, and I'm not saying we can't, I'm just using rhetorical language, then who is? Who is the Rebbe's chassidim today, if not for us? Who will be the Zaidi of our children, So let's get frank, and let's stop hacking a chinik, the way we say, and let's just call it the way it is. We are the Rebbe's chassidim today. Now, it doesn't make us perfect. We're far from it, and we have a lot of work to do, and that's fine. But this is us, and not just us. The people who are listening, you guys too. This is us. This is our generation. We are the people. Okay. So Yutas Kislev, the message is to us. And the message to us, at least the way I'm interpreting it, and then want to hear what everybody has to say here, is the Rebbe sort of says this lofty idea, not just Gamzu L'Tova, and like Yisrael was saying, and everything is for the best, and that's Judaism 101, obviously. But that the actual struggle and the actual Gashmias and everything, you could walk hand in hand celebrating Ruchnias and Gashmias in one hand, in one swoop. It's possible to live in a dichotomy of duality of worlds at the same time where opposites coexist, and it's not a contradiction. And you could walk right through it with clarity of mind. The most extreme examples are obviously difficult when someone's sick and Gullus is hard and being thrown down the stairs in prison and all these stories. Sure. And then there's the day-to-day challenges, like Yisrael said, you're making too much money. And what happens then? What does Gullus look like then? Well, we're too comfortable and are this and are that and that. And the answer is maybe in a different time period, it was a challenge to be spiritual and material at the same time, but not for us. We are chassidim. We know how to live metaphysically. We know how to bring the meta and the physics together to one. We're not Eastern philosophy. We're not Western philosophy. We're Judaism. And in the Sicha, the Rebbe says something. I think just one point, one nekuda. I mean, not one, but the Rebbe says here that how does a person do this? Is that when the person has the consciousness as you're walking into that materialistic situation, whether it's your business, whatever materialistic world of exile we're in, which we are. What is the measurement, at least I understand from this sikha, to ask you, have you fallen into that trap and you're there, or you could bring along your ruchnius with you? What is the measurement? How could you check? What's the thermometer? How can you check the temperature? The check is who's in charge. And when the Alter Rebbe went into this galus, he was in charge. He was clear. He knew where he was going. He knew where he was coming from. He knew where he was going to. And he knew what he was getting engaged with. And he had a purpose. And he went. So it's true. If you don't know, like Israel said, better stay home. But if you have chassidus, and we are chassidim, and we have chassidus as we're learning, then we have clarity. Then we walk happy. We walk good. We walk strong. We walk confident. It's like last week's Sicha with Yaakov. He's shalom. He's perfectly complete. There's no issue at all. There's nothing to be worried about. In the actual everything, the gufa, the mamone, the teirasa, in his Torah, nothing. There's not even a havamina of a problem, even though the problem is real. Golus is real. But we are a generation and we are a people, and the truth is the truth, and that is that we could live, not we have to live Mashiach today. Live the Geula today. This is a message of Chassidus. This is a message of Yitzchak Kislev. And if we're not going to, then who is going to?
Beautiful. I'll just add one idea from the Sicha, and just to add, what you said is perfect. There's a line that the Alter Rebbe could have gotten rid of the whole thing. He could have taken his hand, put it over his face, and he wouldn't have gone to jail. He could have taken care of the whole thing. And to me, the Rebbe could have come to Boulder, Colorado, could have gone to Toms River, New Jersey, Toronto, and could have done the job for us. Would have been a lot quicker, a lot easier. The whole thing would have been, it would have been done. The Mashiach would have been here, and it's all over. The whole thing would have been done, right? But this is the third idea that I'm taking away from the Sicha, the Chassidus, Yitzchak Kislev, Chassidus is all about with Samata, is that we got to do the work, and this is a very empowering Sicha, because when you say we got to do the work, okay, go do the work. It's not the tzaddikim's job to do the work; it's your job to do the work. But you're entrusted in the greatest contradiction in history of all time. Hashem is giving you the strength to get through the two opposites, literally the nimna nimnois, of somehow fully throwing yourself. Like, it's like last week's Sicha again, of like, you could be Yaakov Avinu and be 100% working with not sleeping a night for 20 years, and yet not forget a moment of the Torah you learned, and become out of the biggest Talmud Chacham, the greatest Torah scholar of all time. How? I have no idea. But that's what you're being entrusted with.
How is very important. How is because he knew going in that he had the bracha that he will not forget his Torah.
Exactly.
So if you have Torah with you, the how is the key ingredient. You have to know. Otherwise, you can't go.
Very good. Very good. If you have, I'm saying, when I say I don't know how, I know practically how we can get through it. How we can get through it is learning Torah Chassidus. If you're learning Chassidus, then you can. It makes about how it works scientifically, and it's beyond my pay grade, right? But the reality is, what a l'chaim, what an amazing uplifting Sicha. Is that stop being so, like you said, to be so scared, stop being so afraid, stop living in your own shadow. Stop being scared of the Yetzer Hara, stop being scared of anything. Just go out there and do what you have to do. Learn Chassidus and just go. You could be the best of everything. That's how Mashiach's gonna come. That's what we're entrusted with. This is the mission we're given, is to bring the two opposites together.
Furthermore, if we live this way, Mashiach will be here already for us.
Yeah.
You could live Mashiach. Das heißt Leben mit Mashiach.
Yeah.
I want to fuse together what the two of you are saying. Maybe it's adding, or maybe it's just rephrasing. But the implication I'm getting is that we could make it through the Nimna Nimnois. And like I was saying earlier, I think that the chiddush over here is that had Yosef been given a choice, should he stay in Eretz Yisrael and be a perfect person there, or go down to Mitzrayim and take the challenge, he has to choose to go to Mitzrayim. Because the only way Yosef could reach his perfection, the fact that he could be a Merkava to a Lakus while engaged in Mitzrayim, is when he faces the paradox. The only way that a chassid, that a person could ultimately reach his greatest potential, is when he dives in to that paradox, when he dives into the very thing that threatens him, threatens his very existence. How many Jewish people are there? The Rebbe says in the end of the Sicha, even amongst Jews, we're talking minorities. The majority of the people are going to say, listen, I can't take this risk. There's too many challenges. I'm going to stay away. And yet, what we're being told is that we do take the risk, not because we're looking for risk, but because by taking the greatest risk is how we get the greatest return. If we want to reach this level of Yosef, if we want to reach this transformation of the world, or as Shmuley is calling it, Geula, the only way to get there, the only way to get there is when we jump into the paradox, when we take the risk, when we face the challenge of Elam Haza, of Galus, and we rise above it by transforming it, by facing it, by changing ourselves to be able to live in the paradox. That is how we reach our personal geula. That is how we reach the greatest place we can be. The paradox is the greatest gift the Eibishter gave us. And the Rebbe says, and the keiches that the Rebbeim gave us. And I would like to add, and I've said this before, I said, whether it was Yud Shvat Tavshin Yud Aleph, where the Rebbe told us that the mission of this door is to bring the Geula, whether it was later on when the Rebbe said, Tut al Tzvasir Kent. I say this all the time. You think the Rebbe couldn't bring the Geula without us? The Rebbe could do whatever he needs to do. The Rebbe, in his kindness, in his pashut, in his benevolence to us, that we should be able to grow, that we should be able to be uplifted. The Rebbe said to us, bring Mashiach with me. Let's do it together. And how are you going to do that? By going out into the world, by going out into the place that is the furthest most thing from Mashiach, and bringing Mashiach and bringing the two things together. This is the entirety of Deir Shvi. This is the Yutas Kislev, how we celebrated in Deir Shvi. The fact that the Rabbeim and our Rebbe gave us in their utmost kindness. They said, you want to reach the greatest heights, you want to be uplifted with us, this is what you have to do. You have to go into the Aretz, into the earthliness itself, and you have to bring the Shekhinah there. You have to live the paradox. And then you win the paradox, and then it lifts up you, it lifts up your world, and it brings the Gola.
I'll finish off that. I don't know if I should finish off because that was like a fantastic. But I'll finish off just with one thought, and then we'll wrap up. But sometimes bringing like a personal example helps. And I just want to share a very interesting example. It's a little bit of a funny example, but sometimes you talk father and son relationship, you could appreciate. So I remember one time my son asked me to borrow the keys to the car to go take the car. I had two cars on the driveway. And I had parked one on a little bit of an angle. I remember, so I said, just be careful. And I'm always careful. I'm like, how it is. The kids know better always. Okay. So I'm walking up the steps. He's already in the car. And I already knew that he's going to smash the car. So I had two options. One option is to run out there and yell and scream. I saw the way he was backing out and he wasn't fully looking 100%. Or the other one was like, I was like, you know what? I'm going to watch this play out, benachas, as I knew it would. And as predictable, he backed out, smashed car one into car two, gets out a whole situation and everything else. And now he's got to take the car for repair. And it's Agansa Golos, the Gemara Agansa Golos. And a lot of people would think I'm crazy for doing this. But from my perspective, this was very, very necessary. I was so almost happy with that experience, and I watched it happen. And later, when my son was a little older, I recounted to him that the story and the aggravation took him a month to get the paint job and to get this and to get that. And when I shared with him how I watched the whole thing happen, and I could have technically stopped it, it gave him a parent's perspective of appreciation that was a learning experience, for him in a very, very deep way. And just contrasting that, obviously, here is when you see that accident in your own moment, the gullus, of course, it's very dark. And it's a balagan, and it's crazy, and it costs money, and it's gashmis and everything. But if you're given the ability to see it in this scenario, to see it from my perspective, let's say my son, it's a view from above that changes everything. And this is what the Rebbe says that when we go, when the Alter Rebbe went, an Atzmi, who is an essential being, that there was no difference of time, place, or person. You're talking about tapping into a vision of truth. What will happen when Mashiach comes? Alikus will be bipshitus. We'll be able to see the true story of why that all happened. We have the ability through Chassidus to tap into that today and have that vision. So everything makes sense. Everything's perfect. I don't want to say everything's perfect. Things are far from perfect, but that imperfection is empowering. It's an unbelievable story. So anyway, l'chaim, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Beautiful.
joining us,
Good Yom Tov.
L'chaim, good Yontif.
and we will see you again very soon. Moshe, you want to finish off? Go ahead.
I was just saying good Yontif. That's all.
Okay, we'll see you soon.
May all the Farbrengens of Yitzchak Kislev be in the spirit of this one, and in the spirit of the Rebbe's incredible light that he sheds on the Yontif of Yitzchak Kislev. We should be zeicha to go out of Galus, take it from Yad.
Amen.